My family abandoned Grandma on Christmas. But what I found inside the house left me shaking. This isn't the title of a movie. This is a true story. A story that left millions of Americans stunned when it was shared across family forums and legal discussion boards. A truth about family, a cold, empty kitchen, a handwritten letter, and a secret buried for years. I spent nearly 4 months investigating this, and almost 2 weeks verifying every last detail. And now, in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you everything. Because this story won't just move you, it might make you look at your own family differently as us. Noah stood in front of the old wooden house on the outskirts of Ohio, a heavy suitcase in hand, as the snow began to fall softly on his shoulders. He had been gone for nearly 5 years, changed cities, changed jobs, cut off most contact. But this year, for some reason, he found himself driving through the night, back to the place he still called home. He pictured the fireplace crackling the Christmas tree, twinkling his mother's voice calling from the kitchen, and his grandmother's arms open wide, pulling him into the kind of hug that used to make everything okay. But when the door swung open, there was no music, no lights, just a dim glow from the kitchen, and the faint sound of a spoon clinking against a porcelain bowl. There she was, his grandmother, small, stooped, wearing a worn-out sweater with frayed cuffs, finishing the last bit of cold chicken from the fridge. She didn't even look up when she saw Noah. She simply reached out and pointed at a piece of paper on the table. The note was scribbled in his mother's familiar handwriting. "We went skiing. Grandma couldn't go, and you. Well, no one thought you'd come back." Noah didn't say a word, but inside his chest, something began to break, slowly, silently. Noah hung his coat on the hook, peeled off his gloves, and quietly sat down next to his grandmother. The kitchen felt colder than he remembered. There was no warm scent of cinnamon pie, no laughter echoing down the hall, just a plate of cold potatoes and a few pieces of dry chicken. His grandmother gently placed another small piece onto Noah's plate. She didn't say a word, and he had no idea where to begin. "It's good you came back," she said after a while, her voice steady. Not surprised, not angry, not even happy, just still. Noah gave a faint smile, bitter, hollow. They ate in silence. The only sound was the soft clinking of spoons against plates. No dessert, no hot tea. Just her and a long dining table once meant for 6, now utterly empty. She spoke slowly, not complaining, just remembering that for the past 2 years she had been forgotten every holiday. Aaron said skiing trips weren't ideal for the elderly, said Grandma didn't like snow, said she'd be better off staying home. Noah sat frozen. In his mind, he saw those Christmas photos Aaron used to post online, elegant dinners, matching sweaters, perfect smiles. But now he realized Grandma wasn't in any of them, and neither was he. After dinner, Noah headed upstairs to the room that used to be his. Dust blanketed everything, but the crooked bookshelf was still there. The pale blue curtains and those old cardboard boxes marked keepsakes. He knelt down and sifted through them, slowly, not looking for anything in particular, just needing to touch the past to remind himself that he once belonged here. Amid the old books and childhood toys, Noah found an old Christmas photo album. There were pictures of the tree, his birth mother's wide smile, a little boy version of himself, tearing open gifts. And then a family portrait that used to hang in the living room, now torn. The bottom right corner jagged the place where his grandmother used to stand. He held the photo in silence for a very long time. At the bottom of one box, he found a small video camera. It still held footage from a winter evening years ago. Everyone was preparing dinner. His grandmother, hair tied up neatly, stood by the sink and asked softly, "Is there anything I can help with?" A cold voice cut through. "That's enough, Grandma. Just sit down and stay out of the way." It was Erin, Noah's stepmother. No one said anything after that. The video kept playing. Adam, Noah's father, stood nearby. Wine glass in hand, glanced toward them, then looked away. He said nothing. No defense, no protection. Noah shut off the camera, and in his chest, something began to burn. Not anger, exactly, but a deep, unmistakable feeling they had been erasing her, piece by piece, and he hadn't even seen it. By 10 o'clock, the house had gone quiet. Snow fell heavier outside, gathering thick on the windowsill and frosted glass. Noah sat at the cleared dining table, his hand gently wrapped around a cup of cold tea. His grandmother moved, slowly stacking plates into the cupboard, silent, unrushed. Grandma Noah spoke, his voice low and steady. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the past few years? About everything that happened?" She paused, didn't turn around, but her voice floated out soft and thin like thread slipping through the crack of an old wooden door. "Because you were just a child, Noah, and a child needs to be loved. If I had said anything, you would have turned away too." She turned to face him, then her gaze steady. "I lost one person, your grandfather. I didn't want to lose you too." It felt like the air had been sucked from Noah's lungs. He remembered the short phone calls, the way she always said, "I'm doing fine," in that raspy voice, then quickly changed the subject to the weather. He remembered calling last March, asking why she didn't come to his graduation. She'd said, "I was busy tending the garden." But now he knew the garden had been torn up long ago by Erin, and when he'd asked why no one took her to her eye appointment, she had just chuckled. "It's okay. I've gotten used to seeing things blurry." Noah laid his hand flat on the table, knuckles pale. "And Grandpa, were you alone?" The entire time after he passed, she didn't answer right away, just nodded very slowly. "They were busy," she said. "Erin said the house needed to stay quiet, so we had a small funeral. No need to bother outsiders." The words stuck in Noah's throat like winter air turning to ice. "And when you walked 2 miles to the grocery store in the middle of winter, that was because they were busy too, wasn't it?" She smiled. Not bitter, just sad. They were busy living their lives. Noah and I was just the shadow left behind. Noah bowed his head, and in that moment, he wasn't just a son coming home. He was a grandson who had been absent, when presence was all that was needed. And he knew this wasn't just a cold Christmas night. This had been a winter stretching across years. 3. Noah sat in the old living room, eyes fixed on the crooked family photo hanging on the wall. The image was faded, the wooden frame scratched and dull, but it still hung there like a sad, quiet reminder. In the photo, his father, stepmother, little sister, and a twinkling Christmas tree. No Grandma. No Noah. A thought slowly began to take shape in his mind. It wasn't just Grandma who had been erased from this family. It was him too. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just quietly forgotten. Last Christmas, Noah whispered they didn't call. Didn't ask if I was coming home. Not even a card. His grandmother gave a soft nod, gently rubbing her knee. "It's been 2 years, Noah." Noah let out a hollow laugh. "I thought. I was the one who walked away. Thought they were just busy. Thought I chose to leave." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time that night, her gaze wasn't gentle. It was deep, like an old well that finally reached the bottom. "You didn't leave, Noah," she said, each word falling like stone onto cold tile. "They let you go." Noah froze. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. Gathering the courage from years of silence, When you said you wanted to move out, you thought it was your idea. But Aaron told your father you were a burden, that you were too sensitive, too emotional, and you needed to be more independent. You heard that I was in the kitchen, she replied. The door was open, and the walls in this house, they're thin. Noah felt something tighten in his chest. What did my dad say? He didn't argue. He just stayed quiet. And then he nodded. No line in any book, no movie monologue could have prepared him for that. The day he left home with 2 suitcases thinking he was making his own decision was a script written long before he ever read his first line. I blamed myself for years, Noah whispered. Thought I was selfish, stubborn, that I didn't know how to hold a family together. His grandmother reached for his hand. Her fingers were wrinkled, but unbelievably warm. You didn't walk away. Noah, you just weren't held back. And with those words, a wound that had gone nameless for years was finally called out loud. That night, after Grandma had gone up to her room, Noah remained alone in the kitchen. The warm yellow light spilled over the worn wooden table, casting quiet shadows. Something inside him wouldn't let him sleep. Not anger, but a restless unease like a door had just been left ajar. And behind it lay not just dust and time, but truths never spoken aloud. On the table, his grandmother's old iPad was still plugged in. The screen lit up with a soft tap, no password. In the message app, the top conversation showed a familiar name. Adam. His father. Noah wasn't sure why he tapped it. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe a desperate hope for a kinder explanation. But what he found was anything but kind. A message from 2 years ago, don't tell him about the inheritance. I'm planning to merge her house into the new property and sell it. Noah doesn't have the skills to handle it. Noah read it over and over. Each word hit like a stone to the chest. It wasn't about the money. It was the way his father referred to her house, as if she were already just a piece of real estate waiting to be liquidated. And the name Noah treated like an obstacle, something to be moved out of the way. Another message, this one from Aaron. Sent just a month ago after the holidays, put her in a home. Just say it's for her health. Don't give her time to argue. Noah dropped the iPad as if it burned his hand. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from something darker. A deep, cold fear that even the last fragments of trust had now rotted away like the peeling paint on these old walls. No one had told Grandma. They talked about her as if she wasn't there, as if she couldn't know, as if she no longer mattered. And Noah, he'd been written out of his own life. He leaned back in the chair, his heart as empty as an upside-down glass. He remembered all those times he'd told friends, my family's pretty normal. Nothing special. That line now echoed like a cruel joke. Because cruelty doesn't always arrive with screams. Sometimes it comes in whispers and texts, sent quietly, in the middle of the night. Tomorrow morning they'd return from the resort, suitcases, full of gifts, plastic smiles, and a house that looked warm from the outside. But Noah knew this Christmas wouldn't be the same, not because he wanted revenge, but because the truth had finally woken up. And the truth doesn't go back to sleep. On Christmas morning, the snow was still falling heavy, but inside the house, something had changed. Noah woke early, slipping on an old sweater that still smelled faintly of his grandmother's cheap laundry soap. He went down to the kitchen and lit a fire in the old fireplace. Something that hadn't been done in years. He wiped the dining table with a damp cloth, set out 2 plates, 2 cups of hot tea, a few slices of crispy toast, and a small bowl of fruit. He turned on the faded cassette radio. Let old Christmas songs whisper through the room. Not loud, not grand, just enough to warm the air. His grandmother came downstairs, a scarf draped over her shoulders, eyes widening at the scent of cinnamon and the soft twinkle of string lights Noah had reconnected along the window. "This year, it's just you and me," Noah said, pulling out her chair. "And that's enough," she smiled. A smile that couldn't hide the sadness, but in her eyes, something gentled like a wrinkle that had just been smoothed out. They ate breakfast in silence, but this time it was a real silence, not empty, not cold. Every bite felt like something that had been missing for years: peace and presence. By afternoon, a familiar white van pulled up in front of the house. Erin stepped out first, draped in a brand new fur coat. Behind her came Noah's younger sister. Then Adam, his father, lugging suitcases, his face tired trying to muster a smile. No Christmas tree, no gifts. No one knocked. They didn't think anyone would be home. But when the door opened, Noah was already standing there. Next to him stood his grandmother, wrapped in a thick coat, eyes steady and clear. Erin froze for a second. "Noah, what are you? Come in." Noah cut in. "We need to talk." They all sat around the dining table. Now cleared, no extra plates, just one sheet of paper placed dead center. "This is a confirmation letter from Grandpa's lawyer," Noah said, sliding it toward his father. "He left most of his estate to Grandma, including this house. But someone tried to fold it into the joint assets, to sell it off." Adam's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but Noah kept going. "I've spoken to Grandpa's lawyer. They still have the original copy. Any agreement made afterwards without her signature isn't legally valid." Erin shot to her feet. "You don't understand. This was about the future. It wasn't meant to." Noah looked at her calm. "What future?" "A nursing home after the holidays like you texted Dad." Silence. Grandma didn't flinch. Her eyes weren't sad anymore, just still like a lake after the storm. "This Christmas," Noah said, voice slow, firm. "There will be no more performances. No more edited photos to pretend we're a family. No more cold leftovers for a woman who built this home. And no more erased faces from the picture she helped frame." He stood up. Not loud, not angry, but every word drove itself into the room like a nail into wood. "I've been quiet for too long, but today I choose to stay. And anyone who can't live in truth is free to leave." Outside, the distant church bells rang, and inside, Noah. A winter that had lasted for years finally began to melt. That Christmas afternoon, the snow was still falling quietly. But inside the Collins' old house, the air had grown heavy like someone had touched a wound that never fully healed. Noah was reheating some soup for his grandmother when the doorbell rang. Sharp, urgent, familiar. It was Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor 2 houses down. Behind her came the Connors couple and old Mr. Henry, the man who used to take Noah fishing when he was a boy. They came empty-handed, unannounced, only carrying uneasy faces and a certain stillness in their eyes. "We were passing by," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice raspy and tight. "Saw the lights on. Thought we'd stop to wish you a Merry Christmas and to check on Mrs. Collins. Make sure she's all right." Noah nodded and let them in. Grandma sat by the fireplace in her armchair, quietly knitting a scarf. She looked up startled by the visitors, but no one smiled. No one said Merry Christmas. There was only one shared look of pity and disbelief. Then Erin stepped out from the kitchen, wineglass in hand. Mrs. Peterson stared at her. "You told me she wouldn't be here, that you'd already taken her to the resort. I nearly mailed the pie straight there." Erin froze. Well, she didn't want to travel anymore. She preferred to stay home. "So you left your mother-in-law to eat alone. Mrs. Connors cut in while you posted pictures of hot tubs and Christmas dinners online. That's what you call a family holiday. The room grew dense. Every breath felt thick. Adam Noah's father stood abruptly, his voice tight. I don't think this is something to discuss in front of neighbors. We have our reasons. You don't understand everything. Don't understand. Noah stepped forward. His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a hammer. Dad, I understand perfectly. Every eye turned to him. I've reviewed Grandpa's estate documents. There are assets in my name that you tried to hide. This house was left to Grandma, yet you and Aaron planned to merge it into shared property and sell it. You had no right. Adam paled. Noah, who told you all this? No one had to tell me, Noah interrupted. I have the confirmation from Grandpa's lawyer, and the messages, the ones you sent to Aaron, even to Grandma, the ones you thought no one would ever read. Aaron let go of the wine glass. Her face turned ghostly white. It's a misunderstanding. It was about future planning. Future. Mrs. Peterson slammed her hand on the table, leaving her alone, planning to put her in a care home and take the house. Do you even know she walked through the snow alone to buy food? What kind of daughter-in-law does that? No one answered. The room fell into a terrifying stillness. The crackling fire popped like time, exposing every hidden truth. Adam collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Aaron stood frozen without a single person left to defend her. Outside whispers had begun. Neighbors who once shared summer BBQs now just traded looks, suspicion, shame, and then turned away in silence. And that Christmas, no one had to make an announcement. The truth was enough, and the whole neighborhood had witnessed it. 3 weeks after Christmas, a thick envelope arrived at Mrs. Collins's house, sent from a law office in town. Inside was a copy of the official complaint filed by the district attorney's office. An investigation had been opened, not just into Aaron's alleged tax fraud, but also a string of properties improperly registered under her name. Among them, the very house Noah had grown up in. According to Grandpa's will, the house should have been in Grandma's name as a direct inheritance. But somehow, it had been temporarily transferred to an LLC registered under Aaron's name. The news spread quickly. A local paper ran the first article under a sharp, quiet headline, Second Wife. Third Estate. Noah's father, Adam, was not criminally charged, but he was removed from the family company's board of directors. The reason was listed clearly: severe breach of trust. As for Erin, once known as the stylish, energetic woman of the neighborhood, now she avoided everyone. Mrs. Connors no longer visited. Mrs. Peterson returned her New Year card inside an empty envelope. At community meetings, Erin's seat remained untouched. The only person who still didn't seem to fully grasp the situation was Noah's younger sister. One evening, his phone lit up with a message. "Why did you do this? Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" Noah stared at the screen for a moment, then replied with a single sentence, "Because Christmas isn't a time to erase anyone." He locked the phone and set it down. Not out of anger, but because he'd finally understood some people. Even those who share your blood will never understand. And that's okay. Truth doesn't need agreement. It just needs to be spoken. The following winter, snow still fell gently on the old wooden roof. Inside that house, something had changed. Not the walls, not the floors, but the presence of two people who never left each other behind. Noah stayed. He switched to remote work, turned his old bedroom into a small office with a bookshelf and a map marked with all the places he'd once lived. Grandma each morning would head into the garden, her wrinkled hands still steady replanting the flower beds that Erin had once let die. They didn't talk much, but every act was a thank you and a promise. That Christmas, there was no towering tree, no extravagant dinner. Just two people, a pot of chicken soup, a few cracked ginger cookies, and a cassette player, still playing songs from the 1980s. They sat across from each other, eyes warm like the small fire in the hearth. No more pretending. No one left out. On the wooden front door, Noah hung a handwritten sign. The letters were a little slanted, but clear home is where no one eats dinner alone. And maybe after all the years of wandering, he had finally come back to where he truly belonged. Not because of blood, but because love doesn't stay silent.